Hello, welcome to the FanDuel Punch-Out. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad 50. Talking about tonight's slate, and you got to get creative at pitcher tonight. No, there's no Madison Bumgarner. There's no Max Scherzer. There's nobody up there at the top that you can just lock into your cash games and move on. But it's going to be interesting, though, because if you do nail your pitcher, you can get any hitter you want in your lineup. Multiple any hitters that you want in your lineup tonight. So it's going to be a really fun night. I'm excited for it because you can get some cheap pitchers. If they go off, I mean, there's going to be some pretty big scores tonight, I think.
Yeah, tonight's one of those nights where you hold your nose and just kind of click add to the pitching spot and move on. I think the top play at pitcher is probably going to be easily the most popular play. Cash games, probably going to be the most popular play in GPPs is Lance McCullers. Understandably so, has the best statistical profile of any of the pitchers getting the ball tonight. Highest strikeout rate, solid FIP, xFIP. Good ground ball rate. I mean, he really does it all. Walk rate has been on the rise in the last few starts, and that should at least create some red flag because he did have some issues with his control in the minors. But, I mean, when we're talking about warts for tonight's pitchers, his are probably the least obnoxious. I like McCullers' profile a lot. He's facing a Royals lineup that makes a lot of contact, which nobody strikes out less than the Royals do against right-handed pitching. So that's a little bit worrisome as well, but it looks like Eric Hosmer probably going to be out of the lineup today, and Lorenzo Cain, if he is back in the lineup today, which manager Ned Yost seems to think he's going to be, probably not going to be 100%. He did sit yesterday with an irritated hamstring issue, so at less than 100%, you're looking at the 3-4 hitters. Either one out or possibly both out, or one out and one in at less than 100%. You got to like that a little bit from McCullers. But again, the temporary strikeout expectations, even though he's been a big strikeout pitcher this year, facing the lineup with the highest or the lowest strikeout rate, so they make a ton of contact. But I do still think McCullers is probably your best cash games play, even with the strikeout cap limited a little bit. Not the biggest betting favorite on the night, but he is a betting favorite. He's at home, low total for the game. So I like McCullers the best, but as you said, there's going to be some variety in these pitchers. Another guy I like is Mike Leake at home against Minnesota. Minnesota strikes out quite a bit against right-handed pitching, about 20% on the year. They rank low in WRC plus and WOBA against righties. And keep in mind that those numbers are all accumulated with a designated hitter. They're in a National League ballpark tonight, so that means Mike Pelfrey is hitting. You might see a pinch hitter late in the game, but not an ideal situation for them. So expect the offense to actually be worse tonight than they usually are, and they're already a below-average offense. And then I like Jimmy Nelson. I think he's going to be a very popular play tonight. Everybody likes to pick on the Phillies with the right-handed pitchers, and for good reason. They're the worst offense in baseball against righties. So for the same reasons that I like Nelson, I expect him to be a popular play. One concern is that they do trot out a lot of left-handed bats in their lineup, and Nelson does struggle with left-handed batters. But the nice thing is, really the only imposing left-handed bat in that lineup is Ryan Howard. A couple of light-hitting middle infielders that will bat left-handed against him. Dom Brown, who just hasn't put it together other than his one hot month in the big leagues. And then Ben Revere, slap singles hitter with speed. So, I mean, not exactly the type of left-handed batters that you shy away from using a guy like Nelson against. So I do like Nelson, but there's some other names out there, and I know your favorite name is one that I like as well. Why don't you go ahead and tip your hand on who you like the most tonight at pitcher?
I'm rolling with a guy that he always seems to fit with your stacks and GPPs because he's been cheap, but he's also been really consistent. Not a big strikeout guy, but he's been pitching deep into games. Kendall Graveman, it's only $5,400 tonight. Last 4 games, he's pitched 7, 8, 7, and 7 innings. He's not a big strikeout guy, but I mean, he does have 6, 7, 6, and 4 in those games. At least 11 fantasy points in each of his last 4, and 3 of those he didn't even get the win. Today he gets a Colorado team that, as we know, struggles on the road, more so against left-handed pitching, but not so great against righties either. Graveman's a sizable favorite too, minus 165 and an 8-run total. Obviously, O.co is a great place to target pitching, and at $5,400, I mean, take your pick with hitters. You get maybe one cheap guy in there, and you can get anyone else you want. And I mean, like I said, it's a guy who he's not. I don't consider him very risky. He doesn't have a ton of upside. Only a 14.9% strikeout rate, but 47.8% ground ball rate. I mean, he's just an efficient pitcher, not a guy that's going to go out and get you 10 Ks and pitch 8 innings. But I mean, he keeps his pitch count down. He pitches deep inning games. We'd like to think that he's going to get some run support too with David Hale on the mound on the other side. So I think he's in a great spot, and he's just so cheap. I'm finding it hard to pass up on him tonight.
Yeah, 4 straight games of 7 innings pitched or more, and in those 4 games, he's tallied double-digit fantasy point totals at FanDuel. So, gotta like that. Hasn't allowed more than 3 earned runs in something like 7 straight starts. So, you're getting consistency, and consistency is good on a slate like tonight. The underlying metrics don't love him a lot. FIP and XFIP aren't great, but soft matchup against the Rockies on the road in a pitcher-friendly park. One other name I'll throw out there because I know he'll be talked about elsewhere. I would call him the elephant in the room, but he's no longer built like an elephant. The now slender Joe Blanton has turned in 2 quality starts or 2 good starts. I shouldn't say quality. He did his 5-inning pitch start wasn't long enough to be considered a quality start, but 2 good starts for the Royals. And obviously the Astros are an explosive offense against right-handed pitching. They also punch out more than anybody else. And the interesting thing about Blanton, and I really had to do some digging because I just wanted to know, like, is this just a completely lucky-based two-game stretch where he's pitching well? And maybe it ends up being that way, but he's actually done something very interesting, and that's basically stopped throwing his fastballs a lot. He's turned into a junk ball pitcher. He threw his four-seam fastball and sinker a combined less than 50% of the time in his last start and just over 50% in his other start this year. So he's really relying on a slider, changeup, and curveball, and he's just throwing junk up there. And against a team that strikes out a lot and that's very right-handed, that slider could be a real nice weapon for him tonight. So interesting GPP play. You'd be absolutely crazy to use him in cash games, but in GPPs, I don't hate it because I think there's some strikeout upside, especially if he continues to lean on those secondary pitches. But obviously, if that slider's not biting and he's stuck relying on his four-seam fastball and sinker, it's going to be a long night for him against a team that can really hit for power at a hitter-friendly ballpark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got one more guy to throw out there, Nate Carnes, $6,600. Actually pitched pretty well recently. His main concern is he's not a guy that pitches deep. I believe he's only pitched 7 innings once this season. But this is an Indians offense that's really struggled over the past month or so. And obviously he's at home here. And he's been decent against left-handed batters. Obviously a ton of lefties in this one. And also has the lowest total at only 7 runs. Minus 127 favorite against Cody Anderson. So I think he's an okay option, but not a guy that you love. Certainly a cash game, more of a cash game option than a GPP option for me, though, because he doesn't have a ton of upside. Like I said, I mean, you're hoping he pitches his 6 innings, and that's about it.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Catcher, going to be some interesting options here. You and I were talking. A lot of nights you need to punt your catcher. Tonight's not one of those nights because you have money, so get yourself a good catcher. My favorite, and I know you like him as well, Stephen Vogt, $3,600, gets David Hale tonight. And David Hale is just god-awful against left-handed batters. 398 WOBA allowed. Look up his numbers if you want, but shield your eyes because they're pretty terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, he struggles mightily with left-handed batters, so I'm with you. I really like Vogt a lot. And as you said, you don't have to spend on pitching. There is no position that I'm advocating punting tonight. The only reason I think to pay down at certain positions is to create some unique lineups, maybe leave some money on the table in GPPs. But with that in mind, Stephen Vogt looks great. As long as Matt Wieters is in the lineup, he's historically hammered left-handed pitching as a switch hitter at Camden Yards, so decent ballpark for offense. And Wandy Rodriguez, not the most imposing matchup, but do keep in mind he caught the second game of the doubleheader last night. There's a possibility maybe he doesn't play tonight. It looks like he's been alternating days catching and days off, so we'll see if he's in the lineup. But I also really like Yasmani Grandal a lot tonight. Switch hitter that's better against right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching. Gets to go to Chase Field tonight, which is a great venue for offense. And Alan Webster on a bad pitching slate is actually still one of the worst pitchers on the slate. Joining Sean O'Sullivan in a heated battle for the worst pitcher on the slate, probably. So I like Grandal against Webster at Chase Field. Webster's given up a lot of hard contact and just an ugly woe, but a left-handed batter. So I'll grab some Grandal shares. And there's another name that I like at catcher, but it was due to your bringing it up and some nice right-handed batter park factors for power, facing the other guy in that heated battle for the worst pitcher on the slate. Why don't you tip your hand there?
I'm going Jonathan Lucroy at $2,800. Sean O'Sullivan, we said terrible against lefties, not so good against righties either. And Lucroy, like you said, good par factors for him, and he's cheap. So I'm a big fan of his as well if you are going to pay down. But like I said, I'm probably going with Stephen Vogt. Not hard to get him in your lineup. A great matchup for him.
Yep.
First base, I love Prince Fielder against Bud Norris. Once again, picking on the theme of the day, terrible pitches against left-handed batters. And actually, Bud Norris is worse against lefties than Mr. David Hale is, 410 WOBA allowed. So as we're getting up close to this high score here, these are all the guys you want to pick on, all the lefties in Texas in play. We'll get to more of them. We'll probably get to all of them, actually. But love Prince Fielder there. And then, of course, you got to like Albert Pujols. He gets a lefty at home, $4,600. He's in a fine spot as well. And then I know there's a couple guys you were looking at here. One guy around this price tag and the one guy that's just way too cheap. So who you got there?
Yeah, like Joey Votto, $3,600 at Great American Ballpark against Pelfrey. Pelfrey's relied on soft contact this year, or not hard contact technically. A lot of medium grade contact, according to the FanGraphs batted ball data, and that's a recipe for disaster against a hitter of Joey Votto's caliber. Great ballpark at Great American, at the near the same price point, and I think it's going to create low ownership, making for an interesting GPP play. Adam Lind to $3,700. When you're priced with the big boys at first base, you're going to be lower owned. Sean O'Sullivan is terrible. That's pretty well established at this point. He's really bad against left-handed hitters, so I like Lind as a nice GPP swerve. And also looking at a bargain, at just a whale of a bargain, $3,000 Adrian Gonzalez against Alan Webster at Chase Field. I think he's the best bargain on the slate tonight. And granted, you don't need to save money, but I mean, you're getting an outstanding hitter for $3,000. You can pretty much load up everywhere else if you use him and any of the pitchers not named Buchholz or Wilson, who we obviously didn't advocate. So spend down at pitcher and spend up everywhere else, and you slot in a $3,000 Adrian Gonzalez. Have fun filling out the rest of your lineup because it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, there's a lot of guys who you can get. This is going to be the trend tonight. You can get a lot of the hitters that you want. Second base is one of those places where I actually like some hitters who are pretty cheap.
Yep.
Brunette Odor, you and I have been his biggest proponents over it since he's come up. You nailed how he was hitting in minor leagues. I jumped on board, and it's been a very profitable train. Now he gets an elite matchup against Bud Norris. Gotta love him, 2,600. Now we finally get to the top, the pinnacle of awful against lefties. Sean O'Sullivan, I'll just give you one stat here. He has 11 strikeouts in 23 and 2/3 innings against left-handed batters this year. He has also allowed 10 home runs in that same amount of time. So he's just as likely to strike you out as you are to hit a fan in the glove in the outfield. So he's a guy I want to target. Scooter Gennett, not usually a power guy, but he's got 2 home runs in his last 4 games. You don't really need a whole lot of power to just hit a meatball thrown up there by Sean O'Sullivan. So I think he's a nice alternative at $2,900. And then a couple other options. I like Ben Zobrist. Hard not to like Ben Zobrist.
Yep.
Switch hitter against David Hale. He's just been consistent, very good recently, hitting cleanup for the A's. And then I know there's a couple other guys, or at least one other guy you're looking at. So who else you got?
Yeah, I also like Jason Kipnis. I mean, this is a night where you can afford a $4,500 Jason Kipnis at the Keystone position against Nate Carnes. Not an ugly WOBA allowed to left-handed batters, but you're getting a switch hitter who's absolutely raking against everybody at this point, but at his best against right-handed pitcher. So I do like Kipnis, but I'm with you. Zobrist is my favorite play at second base tonight. Switch hitter. David Hale has lost against left-handed batters, and the nice thing about a switch hitting batter like Ben Zobrist is that when you get to face a relief pitcher later in the game, you don't have to worry about a left-handed specialist coming in and tying him up. He's good against left-handed pitchers as well. So he's my favorite play. But yeah, those are the names that I'm looking at. Kipnis, Zobrist, Scooter Gennett, as you said, is a nice swerve off of what the more popular plays. And Rugi Odor, man, I love the Rangers. I love the stack potential with them with all their left-handed bats tonight. So yeah, those are the names I'm looking at.
Absolutely. And speaking of some big names at third base, there are some big ones. Nolan Arenado, Mr. Double Dong himself, $5,000. Certainly a tournament option. I mean, he's got 3 double dong games in his last 6, including 8 home runs in his last 7 games. So in case you, I don't know, have never watched baseball before, in case you haven't been around for the last week and a half, you have to know this guy's on fire. He's a tournament option, of course, but he's probably going to be a pretty popular one because he's also the only person in the world who's hit that many home runs over the past week. So just keep that in mind. He'll probably have a pretty high ownership, but multi-lineups, of course, I'll have some exposure. The guy I'm probably going with in cash and in tournaments as well, Manny Machado, $4,200 against Wandy Rodriguez, who hasn't been awful, but he's been, like he was before, pretty much just average. I mean, the Wandy line, he's the guy that's just okay. He's not terrible. But Manny Machado's just been hitting everyone. I mean, he's got only one multi-hit game in his last 5, but before that he had 5 in a row. So, I mean, he's showing some power. He's scoring runs. He's hitting the top of the lineup. I love him as the best all-around cash play at third base.
I mean, he's stealing bases this year, too, which is easy to overlook because it's not the first thing you think of when you think of Manny Machado. Double-digit steals this year. He's really thriving in that leadoff spot. Love Machado. My favorite play at third base is Todd Frazier, $4,900, but it's a night that you can afford that. Righty-righty matchup, which isn't usually ideal, but Mike Pelfrey actually worse against right-handed batters than left-handed batters since 2012. Faring better against righties than lefties this year, but the track record, at least in the recent seasons, indicates that Pelfrey struggling more with righties than lefties. Frazier, ISO north of 200 against right-handed pitchers at Great American Ballpark in his career, so you know the power's there. Love the right-handed batter park factor for home runs at Great American Ballpark as well. So really like the ceiling, but I mean, against a high-contact pitcher like Pelfrey, you also have to like the floor with Frazier tonight. Not usually a guy that you think of a high floor with, but in this instance, I'd say that it's there. And a couple other names at third base that I'm looking at. I like Josh Donaldson at home against a righty. Always, at least in GPPs. I'm not going to be using him there in cash games because I think you can do a little bit better. But in GPPs, I mean, the guy is hammering right-handed pitching at Rogers Center this year. He's loving his new digs. He gets out of O.co and hits in a hitter-friendly ballpark. And whenever he faces a righty at home, it just seems like his ownership is not where it should be because everybody just knows at this point. It's burned into their brain. Josh Donaldson against a lefty, get him in your lineup. Josh Donaldson against a righty, that the same bell doesn't go off, understandably so, but he's still a well above average hitter against right-handed pitchers, so I do like him. And then Joey Gallo at $3,000 is a guy that I like as a left-handed power hitter against Bud Norris at Camden Yards. Like, there's a lot to like there. Yes, the strikeout rate's high. No, Gallo hasn't been as good as he was when he first got up, but you're talking about left-handed power in a home run-friendly, run-scoring friendly ballpark against a pitcher that just is awful against left-handed batters.
Yeah, and speaking of awful, the one more guy that I actually overlooked earlier, Justin Turner, gets Alan Webster, who's allowing the highest WOBA of all these bad pitchers against righties. Hasn't faced a lot of them, obviously hasn't made a whole lot of starts this year, but 424 WOBA allowed in a short time against righties this season, and Justin Turner has been a nice tournament option really recently. He's got 2 home runs in his last 4 games, 5 in his last 9. I believe he was on the winning roster on that San Francisco championship last night as well, or Saturday as well. So he's been a guy who's been paying off for people. So
I would say so.
Some exposure. Shortstop, I think you and I are agreeing here for the most part. You want one of these top 3 guys.
Yep.
I love Carlos Correa. He's in a great spot today against Joe Blanton. I don't remember the exact stat, but there's something about he has the hardest average velocity of batted ball off his bat in the entire league. It was him and Giancarlo Stanton, I believe.
I believe he's second to Stanton, so we'll say that the hardest hit or the best exit velocity of a healthy player at this point.
For the next 4 to 6 weeks, he's number 1. Yeah. So I'm definitely trying to pick on Joe Blanton there, and I mean, I don't mind paying at shortstop because there's really no reason to punt here today. And then, right behind them, you got Jose Reyes. Not a great matchup. Clay Buchholz has been pretty good, but obviously it's at home. Toronto's expected to score some runs, as they always are. And then Troy Tulowitzki, if you're not playing Kendall Graveman, I mean, he's always in play.
He's too low.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of the guy, but he's pretty damn good.
Yeah, and the one player that I would consider paying down for, and it's not to save salary, it's just because I think he'll be a nice swerve in GPPs, is Xander Bogaerts at 2,600. He's at the Rogers Center, so you got great park factors. And if Dickey's knuckleball just isn't dancing, that it's really just a meatball in disguise. So I like Xander Bogaerts a bit. Granted, Dickey is usually better at home than on the road, so not necessarily a great matchup, but anytime you're facing a pitcher who's reliant on a knuckleball, which there aren't many of those anymore. There is that potential for it just not dancing and it just being a very easy to hit baseball. And Bogarts has had a favorable lineup spot lately for the Red Sox. You have to like that as well. And that's a lineup that can punish bad pitching. So if Dickey's not sharp, Bogarts will be right in the middle of it. But I'm with you. 95% of my rosters are going to feature one of those top three shortstops. I'm going to be leaning heavily on Reyes and Correa, sprinkling in a little bit of Tulowitzki just for some variety in my exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move to the outfield, you got to love Mike Trout against CC Sabathia tonight. It's easy to fit him. You're going to see a ton of him in cash games, a ton of him in tournaments because he is that guy. There's no Miguel Cabrera for the average, the common fan to just click on and put in their lineups tonight. So Mike Trout's going to be heavily owned. You're probably going to need him in your cash games tonight because everyone else is going to have him, whether he has a great game or not. But, I mean, it is a good spot for him. So you got to like him. Some other options in the outfield, not necessarily going to go in order, but I really like Mitch Moreland. We talked about lefties for Texas. He's got big power, $2,700. He's in a nice spot. A guy that I think is a really interesting play, Billy Burns, $3,600 switch hitter against David Hale tonight. Already mentioned picking on him. And Burns is a guy who obviously doesn't have much power, only 2 home runs on the season, but he gets on, he steals bases, he scores runs, and due to his price tag where it is at $3,600, that's where most people try to get their cheaper power hitters. So I think he's going to be a nice sneaky option tonight in your outfield.
Yeah, a guy that I think is slightly overpriced, and I think it's creates a unique option tonight is Ryan Braun. Usually $4,500. You don't want to pay that for Braun against a right-handed pitcher, but Sean O'Sullivan is bad. Citizens Bank Ballpark has a big home run park factor for right-handed batters, so definitely some interesting merit to using Braun as probably a slightly under-owned guy because he is priced so close to Trout because he isn't facing a lefty. Not a guy that I want a ton of exposure to, but a few shots in a GPP, and he could very much pay off. George Springer, if Joe Blanton's junk balling ways just aren't working tonight, Minute Maid Park is a good ballpark for Springer's power to shine through. Speaking of power, Jacques Peterson, Chase Field, gotta like that against Alan Webster. Adam Jones is a guy that you talked about before the podcast because he's just recently back from injury. Might be less owned than he should be against the left-handed pitcher at Camden Yards, so I like him. Jay Bruce has a track record of hitting for power at Great American Ballpark, namely against right-handed pitchers. Mike Pelfrey, right-handed pitcher, ball games at Great American Ballpark. So all things that are working in Bruce's favor tonight. Looking down a little bit, get another left-handed batter in there from the Rangers. $2,400 Shin-Soo Choo is a nice option leading off for the Rangers. Don't be off-put by his season line against this season because it's really weighted down heavily by his struggles with left-handed pitching. Has still been well above average against righties. Michael Brantley's just $3,100. Another guy, really high floor, great cash games play because he has just the third highest strikeout, or he has the third best strikeout rate against among qualified hitters this year. So only a couple guys that are making more contact than Brantley is. So you got to like that for your floor. And steals some bases, has a little bit of power, really thrives against right-handed pitching. So I like Brantley hitting from the 3-hole. And then cheap power, Josh Reddick, $2,900 against David Hale at home. Not a great ballpark for power, but Reddick, when he puts a charge into the ball, he can pretty much exit any ballpark. So those are really the bulk of the names that I'm looking at in the outfield. Maybe some surprise lineup spots will create some different opportunities closer to game time. But based on what we've seen, those are the names that are going to be occupying my roster spots.
Yeah, I got one sneaky tournament play for you. You don't like his lineup spot, but he's been producing. Alejandro Diaz at $2,800. Gets R.A. Dickey tonight. He's homered in 3 of his last 4. Had a double in the other game. RBIs in 4 straight games. So he's a guy that, he's not going to be heavily owned because he's going to be batting 6th, 7th, 8th, probably 8th actually. And, is going to keep his ownership level down, but he's in a great ballpark. He's showing some power. Got to like that. And then one more cheap guy, Gerardo Parra, another lefty against Sean O'Sullivan. If I were a left-hander, I'd probably play myself against Sean O'Sullivan. But unfortunately, I would look lost at the plate trying to hit lefty against Sean O'Sullivan. So no dice there. But any other? Oh, one more guy, Shin-Soo Choo. You mentioned him for the podcast. $2,400. He's a nice cheap play as well. All right, that's gonna wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out our projections, cheat sheets, and our optimizer at dailyfantasycafe.com.